song is called He Knows My Name. Sitting in the conversation, in the mirror face to face with somebody less than perfect, I wouldn't choose the first one. I was looking for a champion, in fact I understand him. You picked everyone for me, but life's nervous for me. True to who you are, you saw my heart in me. So I have nothing to I don't need my name right to babysit my close eyes. Make no mistake, he knows my name. I'm not living for applause, I'm already scored on. It's all his stage, he knows my name. Whoa, whoa, he knows my name. Whoa, whoa. I'm not meant to just stay quiet, I'm meant to be a light. I walk beyond the solid, never fall, never run. True to are you saw my heart in me. Something that nothing's smooth. I don't need my name right to babysit my false eyes. Make no mistakes, he knows my name. I'm not living for applause, I'm already sold on. It's all his stage, he knows my name. Oh, oh. He knows my name. Oh, oh. He calls me chosen, free, forgiven. One touch of my King is forever held together. I am loved. I don't need my name rights. I'm famous and false lives. I don't need my name rights. I'm famous and false lies. Make no mistake, he knows my name. I'm not living for applause, I'm already sold on. It's all his stage, he knows my name. Whoa, whoa, he knows my name. Whoa, whoa.
Hello, Legacy Youth, and welcome to another week of online youth group. For those of you who have not been here the last couple weeks, I'm Katie, and I'm the newest member of our youth team, so I'll be here for the next couple months. I'm really excited to just get to know you all and just dive a little deeper with all of you. And I'm excited for today's lesson, that's for sure. But before we get to that, I do have a couple quick announcements for you guys. The first is that we wanted to do something kind of cool and fun for this week's youth group. So we're going to do BYOI, which is bring your own ice cream. And so before youth group, just grab a bowl of your favorite flavor of ice cream, and we'll just sit and enjoy that while we're doing our youth group discussion and our game and stuff like that. So it'll just be a little fun treat. And then our second announcement is that this Saturday, we're going to be having a service day. So that's Saturday the 23rd, and we're just going to all meet up at the church and do some different projects around the church. We'll have masks and gloves and make sure everybody's keeping their distance, and we're going to do everything outside, so it'll be nice and safe, but let your parents know if they have any questions about that. They can always contact us. And yeah, we'll just be doing some different painting, some work in the youth room, some gardening, all kinds of different projects. So it should be really fun. Bring a friend if you can. And we're going to end the day with a little picnic lunch after. And just really get to spend some time together. Okay, so the last couple weeks we've been talking about service and gifts and things. So Carrie talked about service and what it means to serve. And then last week, Sammy told us a little bit about the different gifts that God gives us and how we're to use those gifts to serve one another. And if you were there last week for youth group, you know that we had some discussion questions, and one of the things we talked about was, is it easier to see other people's gifts than it is to recognize your own? And why do you think that is? And it was kind of hard to answer that question, but I think a lot of us agreed that it's easier to see the gifts that other people have than to recognize your own. And so this week's lesson is really all about like recognizing your own gifts. And we're going to do something really cool and really fun called the Enneagram. The Enneagram is kind of a personality test, and it breaks everybody up into 9 different types. And in doing so and learning about this, I think it just really gives us a good way to talk about our different strengths and weaknesses, and to explain kind of our strengths and weaknesses to other people. So I am going to ask you to go ahead and click on the link in the description of this video and take an online quiz. You don't have to take it. You can try and determine your type just by looking at the descriptions, but I find it much easier to take the little quiz, have it tell me what it thinks. But if you disagree with the answer at the end, you do not have to say for sure your type is the one that it gives you. But I'm just going to give you a minute now to go ahead and take that quiz. Cool. So now that you guys know your type, we're just going to talk a little bit about what each of the different types is, so that when we're talking to people who maybe aren't our type, we'll be able to understand a little bit more about them. So like I said, it's split up into 9 different types, and each type has kind of a character or like a stereotype that goes with it. It's just kind of like a one-word description of what the type is. And I think that sometimes people don't feel like that agrees with who they are or maybe what that number looks like in their life. So I just want to say, if you don't agree with the title that I gave each one of these, you do not have to use it. You can just say, I'm a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. But anyways, getting off track here. Type 1 is sometimes called the reformer. So type 1s are very organized, and they're very driven by their principles or their morals. So what that means is they have this idea in their head of what's right and what's wrong, and every choice they make, every decision they make, everything they do is based off of those principles or those morals. And that's why sometimes they're also called the perfectionist, and that really comes from the fact that they're critical of themselves and sometimes critical of others, because they do have this very strong moral compass, and they want themselves and others to follow that. The type 2 is also called the helper. The helper is empathetic and self-sacrificing. So what that means is they're really willing to put their own needs lower than everybody else's needs. And where that comes from is they really have this desire and this want to feel needed by others. The type 3, which is what I am, is the achiever. Achievers are ambitious, we are diplomatic, and really, we really just like want, I don't know, I always have I want to change the world. Like, that's my goal in life. And that really comes from this deep down desire that we want to distinguish ourselves from other people. And the way that we think we can distinguish ourselves is through our achievements. The type 4 is sometimes called the individualist. The individualist is reserved and creative. I have a couple of friends that are this. It's sometimes people that are really artistic or fall into this category. And really what it is they want to express their individuality, and they want to do that through some kind of creative space. Number 5, type 5, is called the investigator sometimes. They're basically exactly what that sounds like. They're really curious, they're really independent, they really value knowledge. If you've read Divergent, I feel like erudites would fall into this category. And really what their deepest desire is they want to understand everything so that they can be prepared for everything. Type 6 is the loyalist, or sometimes called the loyalist. And they are reliable and hardworking. If you think about maybe a loyal friend, what that means, a loyalist, there's somebody you can always count on. There's somebody you can trust explicitly. And what the loyalist wants deep down is they want security and they want to be reassured by others. Type 7 is the enthusiast. Enthusiasts are very spontaneous and typically extroverted. So this is like the person who is always kind of just like go with the flow. And really what they want deep down is they just want their freedom, and they want to maintain that freedom. Type 8 is sometimes called the challenger. Type 8s kind of get a bad rap because they're kind of known to be the one who debate and argue, and their deepest desire is for control. They're very decisive, which is a quality I would love to have, and they're very protective. Type 9 is the peacemaker. So the peacemaker tends to be very stable, tends to be very trusting, and tends to be very supportive. And the peacemaker is exactly what it sounds like. Deep down, they really just want peace and they want harmony. And so sometimes they will sacrifice their own needs or their own wants or desires in order to keep that peace. My best friend is a type 9, and when I read this description, I just thought that perfectly explains who she is. I think that's kind of the beautiful thing about the Enneagram, is that when you have a friend or a family member or just somebody you've met and they say, oh, I'm this type, it helps you understand very quickly who they are and what their strengths are and what some of their weaknesses are and how you can best care and love for them. And in talking about personality types and in putting people into types and categories, I think that sometimes it leads to us feeling like maybe one type is better than the other, or I can't relate to people who are not the same type as me, or I can only be in this one space. And I really just want to say, like, that is not what the Enneagram is about, and that's not what our lesson today is about. If you look at the symbol for it, it's kind of this circle with a bunch of what I think look like spider webs inside. And what those spider webs are is showing the connectiveness of the different types. Like, I'm a 3, and at my best, I rise and I have some of the best qualities of a 9 as well. But at my worst, I fall and I have some of the worst qualities of a 6 as well. And I think it's really cool that in that way I'm connected to the 3 or the 6 and the 9. And I'm a 3, so I could also have some 2 tendencies, or I could have some 4 tendencies, and that's what a wing is. And again, it's just a way of saying, like, yes, I'm a type 3, but also I'm connected to the type 2. I'm connected to the type 4. So even though you might be a 3, you can definitely still be in other spaces and have some of the same qualities that other people have. And I think that really shows that we are all connected in this one way. And that's a picture that I think that God paints really well too, in talking about our different strengths and weaknesses. And there's one passage in particular that I think just really speaks to this, and that comes from 1 Corinthians 12. And it really talks about how even though we have these different strengths, even though we are all different, we are one body, and we need every single person. We need every single different gift. We need every single type to make up the whole. So I'm going to read that for you, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more. Just as a body, though one, has many parts, but all its many parts form one body, so it is with Christ. For we are all baptized by one Spirit, so as to form one body, whether Jews or Gentiles, slave or free. And we are all given the one Spirit to drink. Even so, the body is not made up of one part, but of many. Now if the foot should say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason stop being part of the body. And if the ear should say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason stop being part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? But in fact, God has placed the parts in the body, every one of them, just as He wanted them to be. If they were all one part, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, but one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, I don't need you, and the head cannot say to the feet, I don't need you. On the contrary, those parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable, and the parts that we think are less honorable we treat with special honor. I love the image of a body. I'm a very visual person, so whenever the Bible gives a good image to look at, I just think it's really powerful. And I love just thinking about like our youth group. We're one body. Think about it. We're one person, and each of us have different strengths. So some of us are the arms, that's one strength. Some of us are legs, that's one strength. Some of us are ears, that's another strength. And we're all different in that way, but we all make up this one body. There are a few parts of this passage that I really want to talk about that I think are really important, so I'm just going to read them again. And the first is verse 17. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? I think this just ties in so perfectly to what we're talking about with the Enneagram, and also what we're talking about with our gifts. And just thinking about that we're all different types. And like, why is it important that we're all different types? Why is it important that we all have different strengths? And I think what it says right here is like, we need every single person to be different. We need every single person to have different strengths so that we can be the best that we can be, so that we can reach the most people, so that we can do the most things. And if you think about it, you know, if we all had the same strengths, if we all had the same interests, we would not be able to reach as many people. That's really what God's talking about here, and I think that's really why God gave us all different gifts. He made some of us empathetic so that we can listen and feel what other people feel and relate to them in that way. He made some of us really good listeners so that we can just sit and listen to people that need to be heard. He made some of us really good hosts so that we can have people at our homes and just show them just the love of God in that way. We are all needed. And even though we have all different strengths, that we are still all part of this one body, and we're all needed in that way. And kind of going more into that, I love verse 21, where it says, "The eye cannot say to the hand, I don't need you, and the head cannot say to the feet, I don't need you. On the contrary, those parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable." I love that they use the word indispensable, which is really just saying, like, we need them. Like, you can't say we don't need people with this strength. You can't say we don't need this one type in the Enneagram, because those people or those types or those strengths that we might say are like weaker or less important, those are the ones that God says we need the most. Those are the ones that God says we cannot live without. And so in the same way, when we're talking about these types, and we're talking about what type you are, I think it's really easy to say, like, I'm a type 3 and that's better than a type 4 because I do these things and they do those things. But that is like exactly opposite of what God is saying. God is saying, you are a type 3 and it's great that you're a type 3 and I will use those gifts. But the type 4 is just as important and I will use those gifts too. You probably noticed that the Enneagram can be kind of ruthless in its description. I think it really points out a lot of our negatives. And I think sometimes we try and not talk about our weaknesses. We try and avoid them. But I love that the Enneagram so explicitly tells us what they are, because I think it really helps us understand where, like, the flaws in our faith can be and where the weaknesses in our faith can be. So for myself, I'm a type 3. Like I said, I'm an achiever. And I've definitely seen that shown up in the way that I live out my faith. And be kind of negative in the way that I live out my faith. So what that's looked like in my life is the achiever is all about, like reaching a certain goal. And so my goal in my faith is like, oh, God's love. That's the ultimate goal. That's the ultimate prize I can win. And so I'm like, okay, what are the steps that I can take to reach that goal? And so I'd say, like, oh, reading my Bible every day, going to youth group, being part of the church, volunteering in the church, serving other people, worshiping in the right way. Those are all different steps that I can take to reach this goal. And I think before I really looked into myself and before I really got into the Enneagram and learned a little bit more about my weaknesses, I didn't see that I was doing this in my faith. And now that I understand that that is kind of part of my personality and who I am, I'm able to recognize when I'm doing those things. I'm able to recognize how just totally false that is. There's like no amount of work or amount of steps you can take to achieve God's love. So that's something that in that weakness that I'm learning more about myself and learning more about my relationship with God. And I think it's really important that we talk about those weaknesses and that we look at those weaknesses. I think the reason that sometimes we don't is because we think that's a place where God can't use us. But there's a verse in the Bible that I think just totally contradicts that feeling. It's from 2 Corinthians 4:7. But we have this treasure in jars of clay, to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. So when I read this passage, it paints another like really beautiful picture in my head that I'm going to try and paint out for you with my words right now. So for me, I think about like a terracotta pot, like a big pot with a lid. And inside that pot, there's this light, this beautiful light that in this passage it describes as like a piece of God is like inside of you, and that's this light. And so there's this jar, it has this light inside of it, but it's like pushed on every side. People are throwing rocks at it, people are, knocking it over. And that's where it talks about like we're going to be hard pressed on every side. When you think about it, when something fragile like a vase or a pot or a jar gets pressed, it gets knocked over, it gets little cracks in it. Even just like your hydro flask, it gets a dent in it when you knock it over. And that's like that happens with this jar. So there's all these little cracks that form. And for us, those are like our weaknesses, and some of the brokenness. And sometimes the areas that we feel like we should hide because God cannot work through those. But if you think about a jar with cracks, those are now the place where the light can shine through. This light of God, this light of Jesus is able to shine through those cracks. And so it's like for yourself, the areas where God will work through are those areas of weakness, those areas of brokenness, because it helps you relate to other people who have gone through similar things. And it helps you have this level of vulnerability with other people, and just allows God to just work so much through you. So I'm super excited that I got to talk about this with you guys today, and I know we talked about some kind of heavy things, especially like talking about weakness and brokenness and where God shines through in that. This is definitely a topic that I'm super passionate about. So if you want to learn more about the Enneagram, there's so many cool resources, like the songs that are playing in the background now, those are actually a song written for each type by a really cool artist who just studied the Enneagram and said, I want to really write a song that reflects each type. So like I said, there's so many cool things like that, so many podcasts. If you're interested in that, just like let me know. I'm so happy to teach you more about it and show you things to learn more about it. But yeah, I'm excited to see you all on Wednesday and discuss this a little further. It's been great to record this and kind of spend this time virtually with you. And I'll see you on Wednesday with a bowl of ice cream.